On my wedding day, I smiled through the ceremony. Then during my speech I said, "Marriage is built on trust, but my new wife has been lying to us all." She ran out in tears, and I walked away free. When people talk about weddings, they usually picture love, joy, laughter, and families coming together. My wedding day started exactly like that. I was standing at the altar, straightening my tie for what felt like the 100th time, trying to calm the pounding in my chest. The music began, and all eyes shifted to the back of the hall. There she was, my bride-to-be, walking down the aisle, looking radiant in her gown. Every head in the room turned to watch her, and for a moment it felt like time slowed down. People smiled, some whispered softly, and cameras flashed. My mother was already wiping away tears, and my best man nudged me with a grin that said, "This is it." From the outside, it looked perfect. Families had flown in from different states, some from overseas. The venue was filled with relatives, childhood friends, co-workers, and neighbors who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. I smiled, but behind that smile, there was something I hadn't told anyone. Something I had discovered just weeks before the big day. Something that made my chest tighten every time I looked at her. It wasn't a small lie, not a misunderstanding. It was a secret so big that once it came out, it would tear apart the carefully crafted image she had built. And not just with me. Her family, her friends, and every person in that room would see her differently. I can't explain the kind of weight that puts on you. Imagine standing in front of hundreds of people, everyone expecting you to promise forever to someone you now know isn't who they pretended to be. Every step closer to the wedding, every little detail we finalized, every congratulations from friends, it all felt like a lie I was forced to play along with. At first, I thought about ending it quietly. There were countless nights where I lay awake staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the conversation in my head. I'd picture myself calling her, telling her I knew, listening to her excuses, and then breaking things off. I even thought about phoning her parents, giving them the truth so they'd understand why I couldn't marry her. But each time I played it through, I stopped. Why should I be the one to protect her? Why should I shield her from the fallout when she never once considered protecting me? She made the choice to lie, and she made the choice to let me walk into this marriage blind. That's when it hit me. I couldn't just walk away quietly. The truth needed to come out. Not for revenge, not even for some grand performance, but because honesty mattered more than saving face. Everyone deserved to know who she really was. From that moment on, I carried myself differently. I was the calm, excited groom. Inwardly, I was planning how it would all unfold. I would go through with the ceremony. I would smile for the pictures, thank the guests, hold her hand like nothing was wrong. And then, when the time was right, I would tell the truth, not with anger, but with clarity that no one could deny. Standing there at the altar, watching her walk toward me, I felt the full weight of what I was about to do. Not just with nerves, but with the knowledge that by the end of the day, everything would be different. She reached me, her hand sliding into mine, her smile wide and confident. To everyone else, it looked like two people in love. But in my head, one thought kept repeating. They think this is the beginning of forever. But by tonight, they'll all know the truth. I had made up my mind. No matter how much it tore at me inside, I was going to go through with it. I was going to let the day play out exactly as everyone expected, at least until it was my turn to speak. The ceremony itself unfolded almost like a movie scene. The officiant's words echoed warmly through the hall. We exchanged vows, hers filled with soft promises of love and loyalty, mine steady though my thoughts were elsewhere. When the rings were slipped onto our fingers and the officiant declared us husband and wife, the room erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, and a few even whistled. To anyone watching, it looked like we were the perfect couple sealing the perfect union. I smiled at her. I kissed her. I even laughed when my uncle shouted, "About time," from the back of the room. But inside, I was detached. I wasn't thinking about the future we had supposedly just promised each other. I was counting down the hours, waiting for the exact moment when everything would flip upside down. The reception was beautiful. Long tables decorated with flowers, champagne flowing, music filling the air. Guests mingled, the dance floor lit up, and laughter rolled through the hall. I shook hands, accepted hugs, and listened to toast after toast about our love story. If anyone noticed my calm distance, they likely chalked it up to nerves or exhaustion. It was almost surreal, standing in the middle of a celebration that wasn't mine, not really. I was part of the photos, the dances, the laughter, but my mind was elsewhere, holding onto the truth like a stone in my pocket. Finally, the moment I had been waiting for arrived, the speeches. Tradition said the groom's speech came near the end. By then, everyone had eaten, the champagne was flowing, and people were relaxed. I knew that was the perfect time. People would be listening, but not expecting anything out of the ordinary. The DJ called for attention and handed me the microphone. A hush fell over the room, and all eyes turned toward me. I started exactly as everyone expected. I thanked the guests for coming. I thanked her family for raising the woman I had fallen in love with. I cracked a small joke about how long it took me to finally propose, and people chuckled. I spoke about how grateful I was to see so many people come together for us. They leaned in, smiles on their faces, waiting for the sentimental part. Then I shifted. I looked at her directly, my voice steady but heavier now. Marriage, I said, is supposed to be built on honesty, trust. At least, that's what I thought when I asked her to marry me. But in preparing for this day, I found out that not everyone here has been honest. In fact, the woman I just married has been hiding something from all of us. The room changed instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to plates. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with a sudden, sharp awareness. And just like that, the celebration everyone thought they were attending turned into something else entirely. You could feel the shift in the room immediately after my words. The music from the speakers seemed to fade into the background. The sound of silverware clinking against plates stopped mid-motion, and the atmosphere turned heavy. Every person sitting there knew something serious was coming, but none of them expected it to come from me. On this day, of all days, I kept my eyes on her. She froze in her seat, her smile fading into a look of confusion and then panic. Her hand, which had been resting on the table, slowly curled into a fist. She knew. Even before I said another word, she knew exactly what I was about to do. I took a breath and continued, my voice even. In the weeks leading up to this wedding, I found out something I never should have had to discover on my own. Something that changes everything about who I thought I was standing beside today. Whispers began spreading through the room like ripples in water. Some guests glanced at her, others looked back at me, their faces puzzled. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid it out plainly, fact after fact, the way you would explain something that can't be twisted or denied. I revealed that she hadn't been faithful, that while I had been planning a life with her, she had been keeping someone else in her life, someone she swore was out of the picture. I explained how I found the messages, the late-night calls, the weekends she claimed she was with friends. I didn't embellish, I didn't dramatize. I let the truth stand on its own, because it was damning enough. As the words came out, her face turned pale. She shook her head slightly, like she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Her family stared at her, stunned. Her father's mouth hung open, her mother pressed a hand to her forehead, and her friends exchanged horrified looks. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the occasional murmur from someone who couldn't keep it in. One of my cousins muttered, "Oh my God," while another guest simply looked down at their plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She finally spoke, her voice shaky. "That's not," but I cut her off gently. "Don't. You know it's true. And I'm not going to let you stand here and pretend in front of everyone." Tears welled in her eyes. Her lip quivered. She looked around the room, desperate for someone to defend her, but no one moved. No one could. Then it happened. She broke. She pushed back her chair, stood up abruptly, and covered her face with her hands. The sound of her sobbing echoed across the hall as she turned and rushed toward the exit. Her family scrambled after her, chairs scraping against the floor, shoes clattering as they tried to catch up. In the space of a few minutes, the entire joyful mood of the wedding had collapsed. Just moments earlier, people had been laughing and raising glasses. Now, they sat frozen in disbelief, caught between wanting to leave and not knowing if it was polite to do so. And just like that, she was gone. The woman who had stood beside me at the altar only hours earlier disappeared, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like a weight pressing down on every person in that room. I stood there with the microphone still in my hand, watching the doors swing shut behind her. For a long moment, no one moved. The hall that had been filled with music, chatter, and laughter minutes earlier now felt hollow, like the air had been pulled out of the room. I looked down at the floor, then back up at the crowd. 100 sets of eyes were on me, but not one person spoke. My chest tightened, but not with panic. It was something else, a strange mix of pain, anger, and relief. Because finally, the truth was out. For weeks I had carried it like a weight I couldn't put down. Every smile I forced, every detail of the wedding I helped plan, every "I love you" I heard. It all felt like pretending. And now, in front of everyone, I had finally stopped pretending. The silence stretched on. Guests exchanged glances, their faces a mix of shock, pity, and discomfort. Some whispered under their breath, but even those voices were low, as if speaking too loudly would shatter whatever fragile calm was holding the room together. I handed the microphone back to the DJ, who took it carefully, like he didn't know what to do with it either. My hands were steady, even though my heart was pounding. I stepped down from the stage, each step measured, and returned to my table. People didn't know how to react. Some stared at their drinks. Others looked at me like they wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. A few avoided eye contact altogether. For weeks, I had rehearsed this moment in my mind. Every possible reaction, every possible outcome. And now it was real. Her absence was like a hole in the room. The empty chair where she had been sitting only minutes before felt like a symbol of everything I had just exposed. I could almost feel the echo of her presence, the way she had looked at me with panic in her eyes, the way she had bolted when there was nothing left to say. Inside, I felt torn. Part of me was aching, because no one wants to believe the person they love could betray them like that. But another part of me, the quieter, steadier part, felt something close to peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying her lies anymore. I walked out of the spotlight and into the sea of guests, their whispers following me. Some leaned back as I passed, unsure what to say. Others gave me sympathetic nods. The DJ turned the music back on quietly, but it felt out of place, like background noise in a room that didn't know how to breathe yet. It was surreal, watching the wedding I had spent months planning unravel before my eyes. One moment it had been a celebration of love. The next, it felt like a funeral for the life I thought I was building. And yet, even with the pain pressing at me, I felt steady. I had faced the truth head-on. No more hiding. No more pretending. The hall wasn't filled with cheers anymore, but with silence. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. It didn't take long before the silence cracked. Her parents were the first to move. Her father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and stormed out toward the exit with her mother close behind. Their faces were a mix of shock and embarrassment, like they couldn't get out of the room fast enough. It was clear from the look in their eyes that they had known nothing about this. They hadn't defended her, hadn't argued. They just left. Her closest friends followed right after, some whispering frantically to each other, others shaking their heads. A few looked back at me as they left, like they wanted answers, but none of them asked. The rest of the hall sat frozen. My own family looked torn, some staring at me with sympathy, others still struggling to process what had just happened. A cousin leaned over to my mother, whispering something that made her press her lips together, her eyes fixed on me. My best man eventually came up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Man, are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I nodded, even though my chest was still buzzing with emotions I couldn't sort through. Hurt, anger, relief, and underneath it all, a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking around carrying the weight of her secret. Word spread fast. I could see people pulling out their phones, texting furiously, probably to friends who weren't at the wedding. You could almost feel the ripple as news of the wedding disaster started moving beyond those four walls. Some guests stood up quietly, slipping out one by one. A few stayed seated, looking at me with supportive eyes, clearly choosing to stay for my sake. Others just seemed too stunned to move, like they were waiting for someone to tell them it was all some kind of mistake. My uncle eventually raised his glass, maybe trying to cut the tension. "Well," he said, his voice awkwardly loud, "let's drink to the truth, at least." A few guests gave nervous laughs, though most just stared at their glasses or the floor. His attempt at humor didn't land, but at least it broke the silence a little. The rest of the evening played out in a strange blur. People whispered, people left, and the room that had once been filled with excitement slowly thinned out. I tried to thank the guests who stayed, though my voice was tired and my head was heavy. Later, when most of the crowd had gone, someone pulled me aside and told me something I hadn't expected: that she was gone. Not just from the venue. Gone. She had disappeared. Her phone went straight to voicemail. No posts, no messages, nothing. It was like she had evaporated into thin air. Her family didn't come back to talk to me. They didn't want to hear my side, didn't want to explain hers. Through mutual friends, I heard they had gone into full damage control mode, desperate to keep the story from spreading any further. But the truth was already out, and the people who had been in that room would never forget what they saw. By the time the night ended, I sat at one of the half-cleared tables, the lights dimmed, the floor empty. The hall that had been decorated for a celebration now looked like a space that had witnessed a disaster. And all I could think was, at least I didn't have to live inside the lie anymore. The following days were some of the longest of my life. I thought that once the truth was out, I'd feel lighter, like the weight had finally been lifted. In some ways, it had, but in others, it brought a different kind of heaviness I wasn't prepared for. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, missed calls, notifications stacked one on top of the other. Some came from friends who hadn't been at the wedding, wanting to know if the rumors were true. Others came from people who had been there, saying they'd never seen anything like it. And then there were the messages I didn't expect, the ones blaming me. One of her cousins sent a text that read, "You could have ended it privately. Humiliating her in front of everyone was cruel. A few others echoed the same sentiment, as if I had been the one who created the mess. But then came the voices of support. Old friends, distant relatives, even a couple of her acquaintances reached out to say I had done the right thing. Better to face the truth than live a lie, one of them wrote. Another said they had always suspected something wasn't right, but never had proof. It was strange to see how divided people were. Half thought I was too harsh, the other half thought I was brave for not letting it slide. In the middle of it all, I kept reminding myself of one thing. I hadn't created her secret. I had only stopped carrying it for her. She had made those choices long before I ever picked up that microphone. Still, the aftermath was brutal. Every time I opened my phone, there was another reminder of what had happened. Friends wanted the full story. Strangers who had only heard whispers reached out with their own opinions. It was overwhelming, like my personal life had been turned into something for public debate. The house felt different too. All the little reminders of her, the dress shoes she left by the door, the mug she always used, the framed photo from our engagement, felt like ghosts. I started packing things into boxes just to clear the space, to give myself room to breathe. I didn't hear from her directly. Not a text, not a call, not even an email. Her silence was its own answer. She wasn't going to fight it. She wasn't going to explain. She was just gone. Some nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in my head. Her face when she realized what I was doing. The silence that fell over the room. The sound of her chair scraping back before she ran. Part of me wondered if I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have confronted her alone, ended it quietly, and avoided the public fallout. But each time that thought crept in, I reminded myself of something else. She was ready to let me walk into that marriage blind. She was willing to stand there, in front of my family and hers, and promise forever with a secret she thought I'd never discover. That wasn't love. That wasn't loyalty. So no matter how messy the aftermath was, I knew I couldn't regret telling the truth. The world around me was still noisy, full of judgment and gossip, but inside I felt clearer. The path I had chosen was painful, but it was honest. And that mattered more than anything. Weeks went by, and she never reached out. Not a call, not a text, not even a vague message through a mutual friend. Nothing. From what I heard through whispers, she had left town. Some said she was staying with a relative in another state. Others claimed she'd gone completely off the grid. Either way, she was gone. Her social media went dark, her phone was always off, and her family avoided me completely. It was as if she had evaporated. At first, that silence gnawed at me. After everything that happened, I thought she might at least try to explain, or even lash out at me for exposing her. But there was nothing. Just silence. And maybe that said more than any words could. Life, strangely, began to settle back into something that felt like normal. My friends stood by me. My family reminded me that I had saved myself from years of doubt and betrayal. Slowly, the whispers around town shifted. People still talked about the wedding, but not with the same sharp edge as before. Over time, it became less about the humiliation and more about the lesson. And there was a lesson. The truth is always heavier when you're carrying it alone. I realized that if I had gone through with that marriage, I would have been living inside a lie, always wondering, always second-guessing. That would have broken me in ways far worse than one explosive wedding ever could. There were still nights I thought about her. I'd wonder if she regretted it, if she sat somewhere replaying that day in her head the way I did. Did she hate me for exposing her? Or did she finally understand why I had to? I'll probably never know. But here's what I do know. I walked away with clarity. And clarity is worth more than promises made on shaky ground. In the weeks after, I started rebuilding. I reconnected with old hobbies, spent more time with friends, and leaned on my family in ways I hadn't before. Slowly, the heaviness began to lift. When people asked me about it later, I didn't sugarcoat. I told them the truth. I found out something I couldn't ignore, and I refused to spend my life covering up someone else's choices. Some respected that. Others thought it was harsh. But at the end of the day, it wasn't their life on the line, it was mine. Now, looking back, I don't think about that day as the end of my wedding. I think about it as the day I got my clarity. The day I chose honesty over appearances. The day I stopped pretending. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. No matter how painful it is, the truth is always better than living a lie. So here I am, months later, standing not with a wife, but with peace of mind. And sometimes, that's the best outcome you can hope for. I appreciate you watching till the end. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more content.